Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. This episode of Slam the Gavel is sponsored by CPS Protect Consulting Services. A child protective services case is one of the most frightening experiences for any parent. Don't face it alone. Face it with confidence with Urgent Assist by CPS Protect. You can have access to former CPS investigators to make sure you preserve your rights and protect your family. If you're facing CPS involvement and aren't sure where to turn, their child welfare consultants can help you. Visit cpsprotect.com/subscribe and enter the coupon code Slam the Gavel for 60% off your first year of Urgent Assist. And this is available in all 50 states. I have another announcement. Bradley's mother, Narcus Golan, passed away in the fall of 2022. Bradley is autistic and needs structured routine and therapies he receives for his autism 6 days a week. However, Italy just entrusted Bradley to the Italian social services. If he is ruled to go back, he will face the next 3 to 4 years in the Italian foster care system where he can't speak nor understand the language. He will then be taken away from the only family he has ever known. Please call Governor Hochul, New York State, 518-474-8390. That's Governor Hochul, 518-474-8390 to please keep Bradley here safe in these United States. Hashtag keep Bradley safe. Another announcement, go to the site, pleasedoyourjob.com. We need 2,500 more signatures to get a case reopened. That's pleasedoyourjob.com. I would totally appreciate that. I have a return guest on. I have Felix Leo Campos back on. He was last on the podcast, season 4, episode 114. That was on June 21st of 2023. Where we talked about oversight and accountability that's needed in family court, as well as CPS, and the devastation of false allegations. And he came back on my podcast, and we're going to talk about a follow-up, and he's going to give his thoughts on previous podcasts he has come across. And I totally welcome you back, Felix.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you on. How are you doing this morning?
I am doing well, although with the technical problems of the internet and speed and all that kind of stuff. I'm still alive, healthy, walking on 2 legs, and I have you to thank, as a matter of fact, to talk about previous podcasts for introducing me to Sabrina Berry, who's out in North Carolina, and she touched on a point that I think we're all in agreement with, and I reached out to her. Thanks to you, I was able to network with her, and I'm going to take a trip down to NC State and hopefully catch up with her so that we can continue comparing notes and strategizing. So I thank you, Marianne, for networking resources together and advocates and organizers, and allowing us the platform to not just to discuss things, but also to come together. Thanks.
Well, no problem. I try to help where I can. It's, we've got to help each other.
That's it. Absolutely.
Definitely. And so, what do you think about, things that are going on, like, I guess maybe with that podcast or other podcasts you have seen?
Well, what I've seen is that there's a lot of concerned people, and while the podcast might feature an individual, I can hear by the presentation of your guests that they're representative of a body of people, generally family members, who have also been adversely impacted by the experience with family and divorce court and what I describe as the minions, CPS, ACS in some places, Administration for Children's Services, the Children's Law Center, the Child Support Collection Enforcement Unit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I realize that while you may have individuals on the show, they represent a body of people that are addressing these issues and are looking for solutions that actually live up to the height of being in what's the best interest of children and not the institution as it is currently.
Definitely.
So that's, you know, that's what I appreciate out of all the podcasts and what I've heard from your guests.
Everyone has to bring awareness. Everyone has to tell their story and get their stories out there, because the public doesn't know this goes on.
Much of it does. Actually, you know, I'm not sure that they don't know as much as perhaps they're uninvolved, because it's not a direct relationship to them. You know, not everybody is in family court, so they don't know what the experience is, but they have heard the stories. They know someone in their circles, squares, or triangles of friends, family, and associates that is in family court, that has been in family court. And it's not without having been depicted in pop culture, whether it be in movies, books, or television. People have written about their experiences. There have been documentaries and docudramas of what they go through in these situations. And so there is, I think, I believe, I feel an awareness, but it's a low hump, if you will. It's more like a drone, maybe like white noise that you can just dismiss until you fall into it, and then all of a sudden it becomes a lot of yelling, and you start to realize that you're being manipulated.
Oh, well said. Well said, because, you know, when I was going through this, a lot of my friends got it. Mm-hmm. And a couple of my friends were able to attend maybe 2 hearings, but people work full time. And, but they really got it. And what I'm hearing from parents as well is that their relatives or friends are just like burned out on hearing them talk about it. And I've always said, you know, what you have to do with people, because if they haven't been through it, and then they see you coming and they're like, oh no, you know,
we're going to get more.
Yeah,
we're going to get more of the same.
More of the same, and but limit it to like just talking about it for 10 minutes, and then just say, hey, how's your day? What you've been doing? Because you've got to. Even with my spouse, it's like he was working out of town, and he had to take jobs that made more money because I had lost my income due to false allegations. So we would talk on the phone every day, and he'd say, well, what happened? And I just told him what happened in court. And then, how's your day? But
I hope they had your and it's like, well, they're thinking in their minds, getting hit by a car, falling off a bridge. That's not nearly as bad,
right?
as what Mary Ann or whoever else may have been through with the family and divorce court and all of that. No, I agree. And you know, there was something that you brought up just now in regards to court watch.
Yeah.
Okay, I've done court watch, and as a matter of fact, when I spoke with Sabrina, she brought up court watching as a service to people that are in family divorce court, much in the same way that you have legal aid society and those kinds of, I guess, charitable organizations, service organizations. There need be, and again, thanks to your podcast, Slam the Gavel, to have presented Sabrina on it, with whom I spoke, network, and she brought up the court watching topic that has been mentioned in just about every podcast that I've watched of your show. And there is a need, a niche to fill in advocacy, where there is an organization whose sole purpose, or at least the principal purpose, is to have a cadre of court watchers to sit in courtrooms for 3-4 hours, whatever the case may be, listen to whatever number of cases they are privy to sit in, and then be able to approach the litigants, either one or both, to offer service and to come out of the courtroom saying this is not how it's supposed to happen. This should never have been, and then mount the campaign against the courts or against the minions, as I call them, the tentacles, so that they can be addressed. And it's difficult when you're a full-time employee, or you're part-time and you need to find a second part-time, or you're going to school, you have children of your own, and all of that cuts into you being able to sit down in a courtroom, follow the cases, and more importantly, follow up afterwards. Interviewing, doing the research, anything else that needs to be done, because it's all time consuming, and you're doing it pro bono, which is how court watch is taking place now. People just volunteer. I know of your case, I know the date, and you know, if I could take a morning off from work, or call in sick, or drag my kids with me, or the babysitter comes in, those kinds of things, then boom, I'm somewhere in the courtroom, in the pew, taking notes, or just being a physical presence. I've been in groups, or with groups that have made up court watchers t-shirts.
Oh, nice.
And they walk into the courtroom and they sit there where they can be seen by both attorneys, the bailiff, the court officer, and the judges and magistrates, that they're being watched. Understand that they're being watched, and it's on their t-shirt. Right. And so there has to be caution on their part.
Yes.
Someone else had mentioned cameras in the courtroom, because in many instances you're not allowed, you're not permitted to record the hearings. The judges just don't want it, because it could be used against them if there's a faux pas that they commit, or they just blatantly come out with their own agenda, not least of which is to keep the impunity with which it operates intact, and not just for itself, but for its third-party agencies and organizations. But you know, I've mentioned a few of them: CPS, Children Protective Services, and others.
Right, and some courthouses, at least the one I was dealing with, would not even allow a cell phone into the courtroom. So I'd have to leave it in the car so it can bake in there. But I think
they give you a basket like they do here in New York.
Oh, I don't trust. Yeah, you know, they'll
leave it here. We'll give it back to you when you come back out.
I've heard they've lost iPads and cell phones, so I'd never brought mine in. But when I had Sabrina on, we talked about judicial complaints. So when a court watcher sees a judge rolling his eyes, raising his voice, or muting the pro se or the attorney when he's talking because
they don't like what they're hearing.
Right. So then people need to make their complaints. This is so important. I've put in complaints on judges, but a lot of people that I've talked to that had court watch at the same thing I was, and they said, oh, I didn't do that. I didn't do mine yet. It's like, this is so important. We have to do it now. I even have mine notarized. AAA, we belong there, and they do it for free. But I'm actually, before you came on, I was court watching I got a notice in my email to court watch. So I got on there and they started like at 9:40 or whatever, but I got to see it. But I wasn't listed as a court watcher, but they let me in to watch. I don't know. But people have to follow through with the complaints. You're not complaining about a ruling, but to complain about the behaviors. And also, if the opposing or whoever is misbehaving, if that attorney is rolling their eyes, if they're sitting back laughing, and I've seen this stuff, I filed complaints on those people as well.
Okay. Well, that works. here in New York, I took part in a protest in front of the offices of the some kind of judiciary oversight committee. And it's been noted, and I think I've heard it from some of your guests as well as other advocates that I've met, is that their record is abysmal in all the years of they're supposed to serve much like I'm going to make a comparison like the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is a group that oversees police officer misconduct charges.
Okay.
With the judiciary, this is basically people within the industry that are shuffled around into different positions. And so they're judging one another, they're passing judgment on one another. And where that has gone, at least here in New York, more often than not, and by a long shot, is that one judge or magistrate may be found culpable of some misconduct. Shame on you. But that's the extent of the reprimand.
Mm-hmm.
And to look at the record, that might have happened once in 1,000 cases. So that's not a good record. And what it reminds me of, because I'm a New Yorker and I know the history, you may have, and your viewers might also know the story of Frank Serpico,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
who was a New Yorker, played brilliantly, I think, by was it Al Pacino or Dustin Hoffman?
Al Pacino.
Al Pacino. Okay, so it was played by Al Pacino, and he was in a similar situation of going within the system as it is to find someone who will listen to what he's saying and take action. But what he found out is what we're finding out is that you cannot rely, you cannot depend on the institution to evaluate itself, because they'll always come up innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the story of Al Pacino, of Frank Serpico, for those who don't know, maybe I'm giving away the movie and I shouldn't say this, but he was set up by his fellow officers. Mm-hmm. And he was set up to be killed, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He survived. The news media picked up on it, and he was able, because he survived, to tell his story. And that's what brought about the whole external review process of police misconduct. And that has to be carried into what we're talking about with family and divorce court. There has to be an independent body of people to whom you walk up to after you get out of your hearing, or if they should be in the courtroom, so that they can firsthand witness what's happening, and you can follow up with them, and then they can begin the process of reprimanding with actionable consequences, not just smack on the hand, or right, we're going to put you behind a desk. That's insufficient in comparison to what, as individuals pro se, we face. So that kind of independent oversight is needed, because we're not going to get any justice of any kind allowing the institution to judge itself. And so I'm all for that. And while Sabrina was not the one who brought it up, I do remember having heard it in previous podcasts of yours. And of course, it's part of the conversation in the activist and organizer circle that I'm a part of here in New York. And we actually had, maybe now 2 months ago, that protest in front of the Judicial Review Board here in Lower Manhattan. And fortunately for us, it was recorded, it was filmed, and archived. So we need those kinds of civil actions, civil disobedience actions to mount up in the presence of not just the general public, but the advocate communities and governments, so that they can see that this is happening across the board, across the United States,
Mhm.
border to border, coast to coast, irrespective of the individuals involved, whether by race, social, economic status, etc. Everyone is subject to this kind of misbehavior.
So this Judicial Review Board down in Lower Manhattan,
Mhm.
so this rally took place, it was last month?
This is September. I'm going to say it was August, early August. I'll get a date. I know that I have a dub copy of the video. I haven't done anything with it, and I have footage of talking heads with mostly dads. I have footage of uh, marches and rallies that either I was a member in organizing or a part of, whether in DC or here in New York. And the people that come out are from all walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? They have, for lack of better words, they have an enemy in common, the
Mm-hmm.
institution and how it operates. The other enemy is the political will of elected officials who are not without knowledge of what is going on. Whether they have gone through divorce court or family court or had to deal with any of these agencies themselves, or they have heard stories, horror stories about other people, they are aware. Now, whether or not they're motivated to take action, to get involved, to see to it that these kinds of abuses never happen to anyone ever again, is yet another obstacle in attaining justice with the family and the divorce court institution.
I was just talking to one of my friends about this type of thing. These higher ups and even judges who have a bunch of kids, they've got to get this problem corrected, get family court abolished, and let's just go back to civil court like the good old days where you can have a jury, okay, whatever. But the thing is, who knows if their grandchild might not be going through this type of injustice, or their son or daughter. This can happen to anyone.
To anyone at any time. And again, the key word is that it can happen with impunity on the part of the institution and all its parts, the sum of all its parts. I recently got a letter from the Child Support Collection Enforcement Unit, reminding me of my obligations to make payments. And in the letter, they state that there are that child support cannot be collected from these sources. One of them that I remember, but it falls on a lot of people. One of them happened to be Social Security, I guess insurance, SSI insurance.
Mm-hmm.
But what I wanted to bring up in mentioning that is that on the list, the expectation written into their policy about child support is that the obligation is solely to provide payment, not also to collect. So you can offer payment, it not be collected. And what the ledger will show is that you did not make a payment, but it won't show that your payments were not collected, because there's no obligation on the part of the Child Support Collection Enforcement Unit to collect payment, either when those payments are offered or when they're due to be collected. They can just leave them there on the table. And if you come back and say, well, look, I left that money on the table. What did you do? They'll excuse themselves from the obligation and responsibility by telling you that our policy, here it is in writing, our policy says that our job is to collect payment, but we're not obligated. We can collect at any time. At any time.
And the creepy thing is on 42 US Code subsection 666. That isn't creepy. The requirement of statutorily prescribed procedures.
Red room.
All right. To improve the effectiveness of child support enforcement. Can you see that?
Yes. Yes. But that's what it's supposed to do. Now, if you follow the procedures and the policy, all that enforcement falls on who owes, who makes the payments. Not also on whose job, and in being a job, you have, I assume, at the risk of making an A of myself and taking somebody else with me, that enforcing payment, but not equally enforcing collection, causes the arrears. And what is insidious about this that a lot of people are not aware of is the following. And I have to exemplify because I don't have the exact numbers in my mind. Whether it be the Child Support Collection Enforcement Unit or the Children Protective Services, the Administration for Children's Services, the legal law centers, the magistrates, the courtrooms themselves, each and every one of these entities gets an annual budget with which to do their job. And as you can imagine, it's in the hundreds of millions. So let's take, for example, as an example, the Child Support Collection Enforcement. These numbers are fictitious. My computations are not going to be accurate because the accuracy of my computations is not the point. The Child Support Collection Enforcement Unit gets $400 million to manage 400,000 cases. Divide the amount of money by the number of cases, and you have the annual cost per case. So let's say that annual cost is $8,000. Year one, the Child Support Collection Enforcement Unit does not collect your payment. That means that the following year, they have your case to justify their budget the following year and have you come out of your pocket with a second $8,000 just to manage one case. Now, 2 years have passed. They still haven't collected payments because they're not obligated to. They can't, as the document shows, and I don't have it in front of me, the document shows that they can collect at any time. So 3 years down the line, there are 3 years of payments that have not been collected. And as far as the ledger and the balance sheets are concerned, the public perception and that of the magistrates and the judges, the reason why it hasn't been collected is because you haven't made payments. Not that the payments that you've made have been collected. So now for the last 3 years, they have used your case to justify getting a third $8,000 to manage your case. So now you got 8 times 3, 24, $2,400 to manage your case in 3 years. And that can go infinitum because there is no deadline. There is no obligation for that. And so for as long as the payments are not collected, they can charge the public that $8,000 per case cost to move ahead and supposedly do their job. Before you know it, what you have spent as taxpayers, what you have spent on any one individual case can equal or surpass the amount of the arrears. So you may have, you pay over 10 years, you may have paid $20,000, but your arrears are only 14. And that 14, or a greater part of that 14, is payment that hasn't been collected. But no one stops to think, because it puts a strain, an obligation on the institution to have to conform and comply. Doing something in the best interest of the children, where child support is concerned, isn't deciding 20 years down the road to collect the payment and expect the entire payment to be a favor. What pair of shoes are you going to buy for any kid in whose interest you supposedly have the highest priority of, if you don't collect the money 20 years down the road? And then of those arrears, how much of a cut do you think, Marianne, the Child Support Collection Enforcement Unit takes and puts in their pocket?
I know they take, we'll say, I know every state is different, but they, well, we'll just use a figure. On every dollar of child support paid, they match by, say, $1.50. So this is like an $80 billion a year business. And I want to know where that money goes. What's it do? I heard sometimes it goes to grants, it goes to this. It also gets filtered back into the judge's pockets, from what I was told. And in a lot of people's cases, and even my own, I'm sure this is going on in other people's cases, but judges will increase the arrears at whim. Because my case, and I'll briefly, I was in the arrears, we'll say 12,000, I think, because my job was gone due to false accusations via CPS. Okay. So anyway, the judge tacked on an extra 3,000 because she wanted to, and that's unconstitutional. It's also fraud on the court.
But who holds them accountable? Nobody. And so this is where, and I think I've mentioned it in my previous appearance on the show, oversight and accountability are two major issues that advocates bring up against the family divorce court. There's no oversight. This is like this is like Frank Serpico going to the police assignment sergeant and said, "Listen, look, we got some crooked cops, man. How can you?" And he goes, "Well, don't worry, it's nothing. They're not the salt of the earth that these guys that our people are taking the monies from. They're bad people." And then he said, "Well, that didn't work. But let me go to the police precinct captain." And then he started to find out that every level of the hierarchy in the police department, there have been people, officers, who are still on the take or who have been on the take. And so you cannot rely on internal functions to serve that purpose. And the same thing with the family divorce court. There's no oversight.
No, especially
there's no one to go to like that court watchers organization that we created here, to say, "Listen, look, this is what's happening. Okay, I'm going to go and sit in your next hearing. When is it?" And then they sit down and they start to pick up on what the defendant or the litigant is saying to be true, and then they take action. There has to be something external,
right? And
something that's made up of hopefully past litigants who have faced this, so that they can see the innuendos and the ins and outs. Much like being a jailhouse lawyer, you know how the system works. You know what to look out for, and so you can advise and recommend and suggest to people, how to avoid it, or even what we're talking about, hold them accountable.
And even people that are done with the system or their kids have aged out, they're the ones who should be also helping. Some people want to wash their hands of this and then walk away and be glad it's over, but they're very useful in helping other people. I mean, we're not lawyers. I mean, this is what, I can only tell you what I did in a case or whatever, but just because your case is over, I think you have to carry the torch and help other people through
Right.
this.
Correct.
And people
There has
don't
to be a continuum, a
right.
continuum. Excuse me.
Right. In fact, I had a friend who doesn't work, for instance, and I said, "Well, hey, why don't you go down to the courthouse and just be a court watcher in these family courtrooms?" And her reply was, "Oh, I'm not going to do that."
Mhm.
Well, this
Mhm.
involves children. This involves loving fit parents being abused
Mhm.
by the legal system. And okay, so you don't want to do that, but you don't realize this could happen to one of your kids.
Yeah. It happened to you. Thankfully, you're over and done with. I don't know if you're satisfied with the outcome, but it could happen to you. It could happen to your children, your nieces, your nephews, your grandchildren.
Mhm.
Those kinds of things. And a lot of times people, when it's not their case, they they back away. Others, like you mentioned earlier, they're burned out. I've been through
Mhm.
this. Oh my God, I don't know how I survived. I never want to go through this again. Even
Right.
even if it's if it's with someone else, and that poses a dilemma for us as litigants
Yeah.
because we're up against an institution and we're individuals. The institution has the benefit of of continuity. Year in, year out, they have their staff meetings, they review cases, and here they are talking about what came up in those cases that they found problematic in terms
Mhm.
of their impunity and their policies and things like that. How do we address that? And if they can't come up as licensed professionals on their own, then you know what they do? They take it to the law school and then they pose it as questions in final exams or term papers or projects that students have to look up. And when they review those answers, whichever one of those answers best fits the purpose of continuing the impunity with which they operate, the self-governance with which they operate, that's the platform on which as professionals, then they start to massage and to get the language right so that they can institute it into their policies so that should it ever appear again, boom, they have an answer. We don't have it.
Right. And I don't know if we were talking about this or this was on another podcast, but there are 4 states that have gotten rid of judicial immunity.
Mm, mm.
And I should have wrote it down and put it on a sticky note on my computer so I could refer to this. But I don't know. I hope more states follow suit to this. I did interview Jennifer Hankins Lundy in Texas, who is going after judicial accountability. So there's someone who's trying to address this issue and a solution. But
And we need those people, like you said, who have gone through it. Their cases may be closed, but the experience is a teachable experience
right,
and it could be passed on. And so
definitely.
therefore, even though we're individuals, we can now create the same continuity that the institution has.
Mhm.
And we can review cases on our own. We can advise, and we don't have a student body to lay a principle of a question for a topic to be answered, but we have one another and experience matters.
Mhm.
Good, bad, or indifferent, experience matters. A third thing that this brings up in my mind is that there is a segment of the population that's involved that is complacent, they're compliant.
Mhm.
They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to cause any waves. They want to go follow the curtain, go along. And that's inertia as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and that's right. But I know what you're saying. And the thing is, I mean, we got to do this in a peaceful manner,
Mhm.
and we've got to get this judicial oversight accountability. And so I think Sabrina talked about meeting with legislators or.
Yeah, she said that that she was the complaint that she was filing was against a particular judge. I don't know how that would translate to a systematic filing, but it's a beginning. And in her case, I think the judge should have recused themselves from a hearing or a decision. They didn't when she filed the petition or whatever it is that it's called. She filed it, and then whoever she filed it to replied not just to Sabrina, but to the magistrate or the judge and saying, you should recuse yourself. And then that's when the judge said, I'm out of here. Right. Otherwise, they would have gone on. They would have done their undue diligence to wreck this parent's life, the children, and the family that stands here. Mm-hmm. And all because, again, there's no oversight. And we cannot rely with any degree of confidence that whatever the system, the institution create, supposedly for those same purposes, that it will be carried out in the manner that it would otherwise be carried out had that oversight committee been independent. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Independent. Definitely. So we need that. I'm going to meet with her. I don't know how far the conversation is going to go. I'll probably have 2 or 3 of my my grannies with me, and so they're going to say, "Papa, when are we going to? Papa, when are we going to? Papa, but I'll try and see what kind of consensus that we can create to invite you and your viewers to join us to create that movement, so that we have that body of independent oversight, if that be a word. And the same thing happened with I mentioned Frank Serpico, but that would not be the only film of that type. Erin Brockovich, yes, that's the name. Mm-hmm. It had nothing to do with family court, but it had to do with corporate corruption and the same behavior with corporations as is with the police force, as is with the institution of family and divorce court. They are self-governed. There's no supervision. They dump toxic waste wherever they can. People get sick. They hire experts, like the tobacco industry did, and the petroleum industry did, to say that there are no ill effects from nicotine. Cigarettes is not habit forming, or that the negative impact on the environment, like what happened in Alaska, when they had any oil spill. But that one just came up. They said, well, the impact on the environment is minimal, but that's what these experts are being paid to say.
Yeah, right. And also the film Dark Waters that came out.
Yes.
Yeah, and yes. My favorite attorney, I just love that movie because he just kept going. And
that was the oil rig that exploded. Is that the movie, the oil rig?
No, this was, they were dumping chemicals in Virginia. Okay. I'm trying to think of, he was, oh my goodness, he was the nightmare of this company. Dang it, I can't think of the name of the company.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I almost had it. But yeah, so he kept going and going, and people were getting sick and dying from this stuff. It was dumped into rivers. Livestock was, eating Poison. And drinking and getting sick. And so he was, their worst nightmare, and he got millions and millions out of this company. And I just was so impressed with that film because I was doing my federal case at the same time. And it's like every time I felt like I just don't know if I can do this, I would sit down and watch that film.
Excellent. And that in recent years, this is pre-COVID, but there was a community in Detroit, if not a region in Michigan, that were being poisoned.
Yes.
It wasn't all that long ago
Right.
that people couldn't drink the water and those kinds of things, that they were left without any water.
Right. And that was going back to Dark Waters. That was the DuPont case. So he was DuPont's worst nightmare. And I thought, oh, I want to be their worst nightmare.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
holding people accountable is very, very difficult.
It is in this case, in what we're talking about, the lives are at stake.
Yes.
Lives, livelihood, people's general health, their mental health in particular, all that is impacted. I don't know off the top of my head what the statistic is, but suicide, murder suicide, and suicide by cops are all too common a final result of the stresses and the frustrations and the angers that as litigants many of us face.
Mhm.
And so we see no other remedy in what we're doing. So you hear about and unfortunately it's generally a dad killing his children and their mothers before taking his own life, or running out into the streets and daring cops to kill them, and just suicides in general. Not all suicides are because of life in general. I have a broken heart. No, they have very specific causes, and the experiences with the family and divorce court institution is a big one. I don't know if anyone has actually sat down to come up with a statistic as to what is the suicide rate or the suicide murder rate, because it's never just a murder. Of litigants involved in these cases, you may very well be surprised of just how much of that consequence is caused or is due to the experience with family and divorce court. And they're like I said, they're third party agency. And it's sad. It's sad to drive people to such a point of despair where they'll take their own life, or they'll take the lives of others before taking themselves, or putting themselves in the situation where, shoot me, and let's get it over with. That type of thing. I think that within the last year there was a post, and I think I'm trying to remember. It's a single father. I think it's a single father of three. He's a Brit, 34 years old. He took a photograph of himself before he committed suicide in his 34. Phillips or Phillips something or something Phillips. And he took his own life. He's going to raise those kids now. Why is it that the institution could not recognize the signs, the symptoms of what was happening to this particular single father, that they couldn't say, well, before we take it that far, let's step back?
Well, two things. I think they should just get rid of the child support, because there would be, I think, obviously less murders and
suicides.
And these judges have to look at evidence, because there was a case with a 14-year-old child, and she did herself in because she did not want to go with the abuser. And these, I don't know, please look at evidence. Even in my case, no one was looking at evidence. Nobody cares.
Yeah, nobody cares to bother themselves. It's a problem. It's work. I interviewed here in New York a non-custodial dad who is a medical professional, and he brought up the point in the interview that whenever, as a medical professional, you have a patient and you have their chart, you are responsible for going over every sheet of paper in that chart before you do any diagnosis or prognosis or recommend a treatment. That is not the case with judges and magistrates in family divorce court. Mm-hmm. And he fell into that and wondered why they're not held to the same standard as the medical profession. You know, in medicine, and it was a fight. It was a fight. We now have malpractice insurance, but that's because routinely doctors, nurses, specialists, hospitals, clinics, medical centers, orderlies, the cooks, they would make mistakes because they didn't read the documents. They didn't check the stuff. Did you ever see, movies are coming up now. Did you ever see Brazil? It's a satirical comedy by one of the members of Monty Python's Flying Circus. His name is Eric Idle. Mm-hmm. No? Okay, well, to your viewers, I'm gonna spoil the movie for you. But the premise of the movie is that in this society, mistaken identity happen. And they happen for reasons that you wouldn't expect. In the movie's case, a bug happens to be squashed against someone's spelling of their name, and an O became an A, and so the movie unfolds from there, from that mistaken identity. That has happened in medicine, where Marianne spelled together is not the same Marianne that's Mary Ann, or Ann with an E.
Right.
But if you're not paying attention, you're the one who's going to get a kidney removed. You're the one that's going to undergo chemotherapy. And it's all because they did not review the file. No one noticed the different spellings of the name. And so identities are mixed and mistakes are made. And that's all out of negligence, of not being careful. The same standard that the medical profession is held to, so should the family divorce court. You didn't read this man's chart, this father's chart. You made a mistake. That mistake cost not you, but it cost the children, it cost the dad or the mom, and so therefore, you know, they deserve to be enumerated. Yes. But they have to be held accountable. Yes. And so if the medical profession, and I think it's a good comparison, if the medical profession, you walk into a doctor's office, say, my arm, it hurts when it's do this. Right? The registering nurse says, okay, you stop doing this. And then they'll take your name. They'll take your name. How do you spell your name? Blah, 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 blah. What's your address? What's your birthday? Those kinds of things. All right, sit here. You don't have to navigate. There's no navigating. There's no jumping through hoops. There are referrals. You have the registration nurse take you to the attending nurse. When she walks in, he walks in, he says, "Hello, hi. I'm going to ask you a few questions to make sure that I'm talking to the right person. Mary Ann, could you spell your name for me, please?" And if you don't spell your name the way that they are looking at it spelled on whatever document, then one of two things is going on. Either someone misspelled your name, or this is someone else. All right, so they don't get a kidney removed, they don't have an arm or a leg amputated.
Yeah.
You know, also they're not getting chemotherapy or anything like that.
Right.
And the same thing should happen in family court.
Right. They're playing with people's lives. It's the same thing.
And it's a
Yeah.
shame because they do it and then they walk home to their family,
Mhm.
knowing that if any such case comes up with them, that they have an inside track.
Mhm.
You know, they may not know the system, but they're employed by the system, so the system will look after it after its own.
Yes. Yeah, I can't wait to hear, because I want you back on, hear what you and Sabrina have come up with, and give me an update. How
We'll
how
give we'll
how
give your entire viewership input.
oh, definitely. How can people reach you? Or do you want them to come through me?
Um, you know that they can reach me. You can share my email. You have it, you know, Felix underscore Leo underscore the letter C at Hotmail. I'll just ask anybody in relationship to family divorce court or your podcast to put in the subject um your name or your pod Slam the Gavel,
Okay.
and then say hi, my name is, you know, I was a guest on Marianne's show, or I caught the podcast on Marianne's talking about whatever it is, and then they can ask me questions or whatever it is. That's fine.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay, so, you don't jump off, okay? Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I am your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth, and recently released Raised by These Wolves, How Family and Federal Courts Are Failing Our Children. You can find my podcast on Spotify, Apple iTunes, YouTube, Anchor FM, iHeartRadio. And hey, feel free to donate to Buy Me a Coffee to help support this podcast. So thank you again, Felix. I totally appreciate
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you for having me on your show, and it's a needed resource.
Thank
It's a needed
you.
outlet. You know, we can't go to the commercial stations. We can't go to the cable station. We can't even go to public broadcast. You know, with these things, because it's just not in their purview. It's
Mhm.
not something that's tragic enough, big enough of a story that they'll get involved to prevent the tragedy. So they wait for the tragedy. So we have to rely on individuals such as you, so that we can voice our opinion, share thoughts, and come together.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all of your kind words.
It's deserved. It's
Oh,
well deserved.
thank you.